Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 640, and I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot to talk about on today's show, but first, need to mention the Libertarian Institute Summer Fundraiser. It's going on right now. We have $10,000 in matching funds, and so if you make a donation for the next few days, your donation will be doubled. So really helps us out, and it's just a great way to get some extra funds to the institute by helping us out, not only during our fundraiser, but particularly while we have these matching funds. So if you can, head on over to the institute and make a donation. Of course, at the institute, I'm the news editor, so I put out this show. I write news articles. There's usually at least one every day, Monday through Friday at the institute, as well as putting out the daily news roundup. So, I put out a lot of content at the institute, but I'm really just one small piece of a very great organization. We've published 14 books, including books in the past year by Lori Calhoun, James Bovard, and Tom Woods. We're going to publish Scott Horton's forthcoming book, Provoked, a couple books by Keith Knight on the way, and of course he hosts the great Don't Tread on Anyone podcast. So we always got tons of great stuff at the institute. Please check us out every day to keep up with all the work we're doing, but right now head on over and make a donation. All right, everybody, let's get into the news. First up here is an article that I wrote for the institute on July 18th. Kenyan soldiers begin armed patrols in Haiti in American armored vehicles. So hundreds of Kenyan soldiers deployed to Haiti began patrolling the streets around the National Palace. Gunfire was heard during the operations, and an American armored vehicle broke down. On Wednesday, Kenyan soldiers and an American MRAP vehicles patrolled the streets of Port-au-Prince near the National Palace. The troops are in Haiti on a UN Security Council endorsed mission to take control over the capital city from armed groups. In recent years, gangs have seized from the government a growing portion of Port-au-Prince. The situation worsened after the US-backed Ariel Henry's ascension to power following the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021. Henry recently agreed to hand over control of Haiti at the White House's urging, and now there's a coalition in power in Haiti. Of course, being a part of that coalition, one of the key demands that Washington had is you had to endorse this UN-backed mission, these Kenyan, what they call police, but if you look at them, they're clearly soldiers. I mean, you could call them police officers, but if they're in full fatigues and they have on helmets and they're carrying around rifles, then, for all intents and purposes, they are soldiers. And so this is the situation that you have. And again, the Americans said that, hey, if you want to rule Haiti, one of our conditions is you have to be supportive of this mission. So gangs currently control about 80% of Port-au-Prince. For the Kenyan soldiers, the first patrols in Port-au-Prince were not uneventful. Scores of gunshots were reported, and Haitian journalist Wendy Feel posted a video on X showing one of the armored vehicles getting towed. So it looks like it broke down somewhere near the National Palace. It didn't seem at any time these Haitian soldiers were in any kind of danger. It seemed to be probably a highly coordinated event with the international media because there were a lot of reporters out there, and not just Haitian reporters, but this particular Feel is a Haitian reporter. So, after months of delay, hundreds of Kenyan soldiers arrived in Haiti in recent weeks. The Kenyan operations in Haiti, dubbed as a policing mission, are supported and funded by the United States. The U.S.-backed government in Haiti, led by Prime Minister Gary Conselli, issued a series of decrees empowering the Kenyan soldiers to target the armed Haitian groups. This will allow the government to have the necessary tools and instruments to confront the bandits and restore accountability of the authority of the state. The final objective is to take back all the areas that are controlled by the gangs, house by house, neighborhood by neighborhood, and city by city, he said. So I mean, that sounds like a pretty extensive military campaign. And given how limited these operations were, and how you don't want to call them unsuccessful, but marred with problems that this operation was, doesn't really give you confidence that the Kenyan soldiers will be able to do this. Of course, it's also worth knowing there's significant protests going on in Kenya, or have been in the past couple of weeks. There was a tax law. I believe the protesters actually forced the Kenyan government to take it off the table. That wasn't until, of course, people died at the protests. And so, just another reason, a cause for concern. The Kenyan police officers in Kenya are killing protesters. So what would happen if there was a significant protest movement in Haiti? Next up here, Russia says it may deploy nuclear missiles in response to new U.S. missile deployment to Germany. So, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Thursday that Moscow won't rule out deploying nuclear missiles in response to the U.S. plan to deploy missile systems to Germany in 2026 that were previously banned by the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, that is the INF agreement. I didn't rule anything out, Ryabkov said when asked about the possibility of a nuclear deployment. Ryabkov went on to reference Kaliningrad, the Russian oblast on the Baltic Sea that's wedged between Lithuania and Poland and separated from the rest of Russia. He said the territory has long attracted the unhealthy attention of its opponents. Hitting Russia could respond to the U.S. hinting Russia could respond to the U.S. deployment by sending weapons to Kaliningrad, Ryabkov said. Kaliningrad is no exception in the terms of our 100% determination to do everything necessary to push back those who may harbor aggressive plans and who try to provoke us to take certain steps that are undesirable for anyone and are fraught with further complications. The INF, which the U.S. withdrew from in 2019, prohibited land-based missile systems with a range between 310 and 3,400 miles. The planned U.S. deployment to Germany included a land-based version of the nuclear-capable Tomahawk missile, which has a range of about 1,000 miles and are primarily used by the U.S. Navy ships and submarines. The U.S. announced the deployment during last week's NATO summit in Washington and said it would also include SM-6 missiles and developmental hypersonic weapons. Based on the statement, the U.S. is likely to deploy the Typhoon launcher, a covert system concealed in a 40-foot shipping container that can fire Tomahawks and SM-6 missiles. SM-6 missiles can hit targets 290 miles away, below the levels previously banned by the INF. When the U.S. withdrew from the INF treaty, it claimed Russia was violating the agreement by developing ground-launched M729 cruise missiles. Russian officials denied the missile was in violation, saying it had a range of only 298 miles. Russia said the U.S. was in violation of the INF by establishing the Aegis Ashore missile system in Romania and Poland. The system uses Mk-41 vertical launchers, which can fit Tomahawk missiles. During the NATO summit, the U.S. also announced the Aegis system in Poland is now operational. The U.S. refused to negotiate with Russia on INF issues, and the Trump administration tore up the treaty in 2019 and began testing previously banned missile systems almost immediately after. It was clear that the U.S. exited the treaty so it could develop intermediate-range missiles near China, leading Russia to propose a moratorium on the development of INF missiles in Europe, but the U.S. never accepted the offer. And so, have another article here on the nuclear provocations in Europe. Russian fighter jets intercept U.S. strategic bombers over Arctic. So 2 American B-52 bombers flying in the direction of Russia were turned away by Moscow's fighter jets, one of the U.S.'s primary strategic aircraft, B-52s are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. On Sunday, Washington ordered 2 long-range bombers to conduct operations near the Russian border from Finnish airspace. The Kremlin reported that MiG-29 and MiG-35 fighters turned back the American nuclear-capable aircraft. So this is from the Russian Defense Ministry. The crews of the Russian fighter identified the air targets as 2 B-52N strategic bombers of the U.S. Air Force. When the Russian fighter jets approached, the U.S. strategic bombers turned away from the Russian state border. Helsinki recently was added as the 31st member of the NATO alliance. Of course, Sweden was later added as the 32nd. Finland shares an 800-mile-long border with Russia. After Helsinki applied for NATO membership, President Vladimir Putin said Moscow was not opposed to Finland joining the bloc, but would object to the alliance increasing its military presence in the Nordic region. Helsinki claimed the operations were normal. This is from the Finnish defense minister. Finland has implemented cooperation with the strategic bombers of the United States in the territory of Finland. It is about the normal cooperation carried out in the territory of a NATO member country and the demonstration of the basic pillar of common defense, deterrence, and defense. So over the past 2 decades, Putin has consistently voiced stern opposition to an increasing American and NATO nuclear posture in Europe. President Barack Obama placed missile launchers in Poland and Romania that are capable of firing nuclear-armed cruise missiles. And so, we could get into all the INF stuff treaty. I talked about a little bit in my article here, but since we already talked about that in Dave's article, I'm going to skip over that portion. And let's get into the possibility of ending the war in Ukraine. Russia says, let's be realistic about chances of Trump ending Ukraine war. So on Thursday, this is the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, said that comments from former President Donald Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance about ending the war in Ukraine are good, I guess, but said Moscow needed to be realistic about the prospect. So she said, we saw the statements. Trump said he would resolve the conflict within 24 hours. Then Vance said that China is the bigger problem for the United States than the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It is necessary to separate pre-election rhetoric from statements by government officials vested with the appropriate powers. If we talk about whether it is possible to resolve this conflict, let's be realistic. She pointed out that during the previous Trump administration, the president and some of his advisors made statements about bringing peace to the Middle East. They prepared for the deal of the century for quite a long time, but it did not end in anything. Under Biden, on the contrary, a colossal historical tragedy happened. Russian President Vladimir Putin has also noted Trump's comments about ending the war in Ukraine and said he took them seriously, but said he is not familiar with any concrete proposals put forward by the former president. In an interview with the New York Times last month, Vance laid out some ideas for a potential peace plan. What I would like to do is to freeze the territorial lines somewhere close to where they are right now. That's number one. Number two is you guarantee both Kiev's independence, but also its neutrality. It's the fundamental thing that Russia has asked for from the beginning. And then there's three. I think there's going to have to be some American security assistance over the long term. I think those are the things that are certainly achievable, yes. Vance wants the U.S. to wind down its support for Ukraine so it could focus more on building up in the Asia Pacific and arming Taiwan. So he told the Times, the thing that we can control now is making it costly for China to invade Taiwan, and we're not doing that because we're sending all the damn weapons to Ukraine and not Taiwan. And this is, just a really good example of American politics right here, where you're just constantly disappointed by every single candidate and every single party. Even when they say something good, it's only because they say something worse. And so, a lot of times in Washington, somebody will say, oh, we don't want to give weapons to Ukraine. We want to give weapons to Israel and China. Or somebody may be less concerned on Israel, but they're very concerned about giving weapons to Ukraine and Taiwan and confronting China. And so it's just an absolute, tragedy. Now, just a little bit more on here. This one from Dave DeCamp, July 21st, antiwar.com. Trump speaks with Zelensky, says he will work to end the war in Ukraine. So, former President Donald Trump said Friday that he spoke with Ukrainian President Zelensky and said he would work to end the war in Ukraine. I appreciate Zelensky for reaching out because I, as your next president of the United States, will bring peace to the world and end the war that has cost so many lives and devastated countries, innocent families. Trump wrote on his social media platform Truth Social. Both sides will be able to come together and negotiate a deal that ends the violence and paves a path forward to prosperity, he added. The conversation came after Trump was formally nominated as the Republican presidential candidate. Zelensky's office said in a statement on the call that the Ukrainian president congratulated Trump on his nomination as candidate of the Republican Party in the presidential elections. The statement said Zelensky condemned the assassination attempt on Trump and that the two leaders agreed to discuss in a personal meeting what steps can be taken to restore a just peace for Ukraine as soon as possible. Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, has also said he favors a peace deal in Ukraine so the U.S. could focus on China, which he called the biggest threat. Since April of 2022, when peace talks between Russia and Ukraine were discouraged by the U.S. and NATO broke down, Zelensky has rejected the idea of negotiations with Moscow, but he has recently said Russia should attend the next International Peace Summit on the war that he organizes, signaling a shift on his view. And so I could really see this maybe being something that forces Zelensky or is an excuse for Zelensky to do the right thing here, which is really start negotiations to end the war. Maybe prior to the past, 3 weeks with Biden's debate performance, the assassination attempt on President Trump, and now Biden dropping out, which, by the way, gotta tell all you guys, I think I've been saying, I didn't think Biden was going to drop out. So he ends up dropping out. I really didn't think he would drop out unless there was a for sure, concrete, 100% plan to make sure that Kamala Harris is the next DNC nominee. And I'm not sure we really got that. Maybe we will. It certainly seems like it's moving in that direction. I saw she got endorsements from Biden and Clinton, but some others stopped short and some suggested that they may throw their hat in the ring, where I really thought that it would be a situation where essentially, maybe not every single Democrat, but the 99% of the public officials are all, Biden is out, Harris is in. This is going to be the same old administration, 100% supported. We think that this is the best ticket to beat Donald Trump. We'll add a vice president, you know what I mean? And maybe even they would have the vice president lined up by then. I really thought this would all come far more smoothly and coordinated from the DNC. And so I'm very surprised it's kind of breaking and happening like it is. But all this together, I'm sure Zelensky has to, or somebody around Zelensky should be telling him at least that, like, hey, Mr. President, like, our situation from the view of the Americans is probably going to change in the next 6 to 9 months. And we really need to realize that there isn't going to be a long enough war for us to retake all of our territory. And so something has to change here. And now, again, there's a lot of other factors on why Zelensky should be negotiating, including the fact that Ukraine's struggling to field a military and, the Western weapons are drying up. They're losing territory to Russia. They're losing people to Russia. Their infrastructure has now been devastated. It's going to be an absolute brutal winter for the Ukrainians. So there are a lot of reasons for Ukraine to negotiate, but if it takes Trump returning to office to spur Zelensky to do that, then hopefully maybe we are moving in the right direction now. It's been a while since I've been at least even moderately optimistic on thoughts on Ukraine, but the fact that Zelensky is even bothering to call Trump at this point seems like a good sign to me as well. Now, again, we will see what comes of this. Maybe Zelensky is going to call Trump and basically just say, oh, I heard about the assassination attempt. I saw the videos, how horrible. I've been, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm sure Zelensky will say, I've been the subject of assassination attempts myself. I know how difficult these things are. And he'll really try to, like, make Trump feel like, when you get, you're a hero now. You're one of the greats. You're gonna be a great president, Mr. Trump. We love you so much. Your courage staying there saying fight, fight, fight. That's what the Ukrainian people believe in. That's what we're doing every day. And my guess is that if Ukraine still has the high quality of lobbyists and lawyers that they do, Zelensky was scripted to say something like that to Donald Trump. And, so maybe this was just a ploy to try to get him on side, but it does seem like there may be some realization that this war will come to an end. And Ukraine's best option at this point is to start talking with Russia. All right. Next up here, let's get into some news about Gaza, and it's all bad. Netanyahu visits Israeli troops in Rafah, says Israel must maintain control of Gaza-Egypt border. So on Thursday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made a surprise trip to visit Israeli troops in the southern Gaza Strip city of Rafah and said Israel must maintain control over the Gaza-Egypt border, known as the Philadelphia Corridor. Netanyahu has previously said that any deal with Hamas must allow Israel to maintain control of the border, including the Rafah crossing, which has been cut off to aid delivery since Israel took control of it on May 7th. The Prime Minister's demands has complicated talks not only with Hamas but also with Egypt, which poses the indefinite Israeli control of the border. According to Netanyahu's office, he said that Rafah, the Israeli troops there understand that our holding of the Philadelphia corridor and the Rafah crossing are vital for the future. He added that military pressure the soldiers were applying to the threat of Hamas was helping advance the hostage deal, but Netanyahu has been working to sabotage a potential agreement, something that has been widely acknowledged by Israeli officials. The Mossad director, David Barnea, the official in charge of negotiations, said on Wednesday that Netanyahu's demands were preventing a deal, and I'm sure that his trip to Rafah is just a part of this whole stunt to prevent a deal. I'm sure one of the things the Palestinians would really want is for Israel to leave control of the Rafah border crossing. Since Israel seized control of it, aid hasn't entered through it, and so I'm sure there's going to be a sense of feeling from the Palestinian side here that without that reopening, then they're going to be fully besieged by Israel. So Netanyahu also discussed his upcoming trip to Washington. He said, next week I am leaving for the U.S. to address both houses of Congress. I am going to present the justice of Israel's cause. For months leading up to the Israeli invasion of Rafah, the Biden administration was warning against doing so without a clear plan for the over 1 million civilians who were sheltering there. Israel went ahead with the attack without accounting for the civilians, and the U.S. still supported it, claiming it was a limited assault, but the Israeli forces killed many civilians and left Rafah in ruins. Civilians who fled the city have been scattered throughout southern and central Gaza, ending up in so-called safe zones that Israel continues to bomb, including the Al-Mawasi camp on the coast. All right, another one from Dave DeCamp. Netanyahu blots order to build field hospital for Gaza children. So the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant announced on Wednesday that the Israeli military was setting up a field hospital inside Israel to treat Palestinian children from Gaza, but Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vetoed the plan. Netanyahu's office said that he informed Gallant in writing that the Prime Minister does not approve of establishing a temporary hospital for Gaza's children, and therefore it would not be established. An official, the in the Israeli Defense Ministry told the Times of Israel that Netanyahu blocked the hospital for political reasons. Netanyahu could come under criticism from extremist members of his coalition government for enabling the treatment of Palestinian children, which includes not only kids wounded by Israeli airstrikes, but also newborn babies who are dying due to a lack of nutrition since their malnourished mothers cannot breastfeed. Some of the children have been evacuated into Egypt for medical care, but since Israel captured the Rafah border crossing on May 7th, the vital lifeline has been cut off. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, nearly 16,000 children have been killed by the Israeli assault on Gaza, and 38,000 have been wounded, which includes many amputees. Due to the Israeli siege, children's limbs have been amputated without anesthetics. Foreign doctors and health workers who volunteered in Gaza's hospitals have recalled horrific scenes. Nick Maynard, a British doctor who worked at the Al-Aqsa hospital, recalled a story about a young girl who was left to die on the hospital floor. Maynard said, "One child that I'll never forget had burned so bad that you could see her facial bones. We knew there was no chance of saving her surviving that, but there was no morphine to give her. Not only was she inevitably going to die, but she was going to die in agony. And what made it even worse was that there was nowhere for her to go and die. So she just was left on the floor of the emergency department to die." And there's another article just published in Politico by two Western doctors. I want to pull it up for you here. It's our spotlight article today at antiwar.com, and the piece is titled, "We volunteered at Gaza Hospital. What we saw was unspeakable." And so it's two American surgeons, I believe one is Jewish and one is Muslim, who went to Gaza and did 2 weeks at the European hospital. And I mean, what they described is, I don't want to repeat on the show. I guess I would recommend that some of you go check out, but the surgeries that they performed on children, on burns, amputations, and just the number of people dying. They described, when they first got to the hospital, a rash of kids came in all with gunshot wounds to the heads, and they were told by the parents that the kids were either outside or even inside the house playing. And so it seems like Israeli snipers, our gunmen, had just opened fire and blew the heads off of children in mass numbers, just over a course of a couple of days, because they can. And all this, the lack of the hospitals and everything the Israelis are doing really makes it clear that what we are talking about here in Gaza is meant to be a genocide. This is meant to destroy the Palestinian society of Gaza and make sure that the people flee the land in order just to live and not to be slaughtered and massacred in these absolute cruel ways. All right, next up here, Israel's Ben Gvir makes provocative visit to Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the Israeli Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben Gvir, made a provocative visit to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Israeli-occupied East Jerusalem on Thursday as a part of his effort to thwart a hostage deal with Hamas. Ben Gvir, the leader of the Jewish Power Party, said in a video he recorded in front of the Dome of the Rock that Netanyahu shouldn't make a deal with Hamas despite the increasing domestic pressure. "I am praying, and I am also working hard so that the Prime Minister will have the strength to fold and go on to victory, to add military pressure to stop the fuel from entering Gaza, to win. Under the status quo at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, known as the Temple Mount to the Israelis, non-Muslims can visit the site but cannot pray. Ben Gvir and other extremist settlers frequently defy the ban, raising fears among Palestinians that Israel might try to take over the mosque, the third holiest site in Islam." Ben Gvir said in the video that he had to the most important place for the state of Israel, for the Jewish people, to pray for the hostages to return home, but without a reckless deal, without surrender. Ben-Gvir's visit to Alaska are all the more provocative since he is the Minister of National Security, a powerful position that puts him in charge of Israeli police, border guards, and prisons. Israeli police raids on Alaska were a major motivation for the Hamas attack on southern Israel, which was named Alaska Flood. A source close to Hamas told Reuters back in October of 2023, it was triggered by scenes and footage of Israelis storming Alaska mosques during Ramadan, beating worshippers, attacking them, dragging elderly young men out of the mosque. All this fueled, ignited the anger. All right, so ICJ, Israel presence, settlements in occupied Palestine is unlawful. So the UN's highest court, the International Court of Justice, or the ICJ, has issued a ruling on Israel's presence in the occupied Palestinian territories, saying it is unlawful and must come to an end as rapidly as possible. The non-binding ruling comes amid an open-ended war in the Gaza Strip and growing calls from ministers in Israel to expand control over the West Bank to a full-scale annexation. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich said that Israel should prepare to make the move in response to the ICJ warning, arguing it was necessary to thwart any Palestinian state. The status quo arguably already precludes the creation of a Palestinian state, with the settlements positioned to prevent any congruous territory from being available for an independent Palestine. The ICJ ruling, which again is non-binding, is that the settlement and the government actions, including the systematic discrimination against the Palestinians inside the territory, already amounts to an annexation in parts of would-be Palestine. Israel responded with anger to the ruling with accusations of anti-Semitism. Ben-Gvir appeared to call once more for annexation, saying the time has come for governance and sovereignty. Settler leaders echoed the call for sovereignty over the occupied territories, saying the ICJ ruling that the settlements are a violation of international law was itself a violation of international law and the Bible, insisting that the Israelis should apply sovereignty to Judea and Samaria. All right, next up here, the U.S. also criticizes the ICJ ruling. The U.S. has criticized the International Court of Justice's ruling that said the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories is illegal and must come to an end, claiming it impedes a two-state solution. So a State Department spokesperson told Reuters in an email on Saturday, "We are concerned about the breadth of the court's opinion will complicate efforts to resolve the conflict and bring about an urgently needed and lasting peace with just two states living side by side in peace and security." And so this has been the Biden administration's rhetoric, and it's really disgusting, right? Where they continue to say that basically we can't move forward with anything that would bring about a resolution because it would prevent a resolution. Right? They say there has to be a two-state solution, but it can only be negotiated when Israel wants to negotiate, and any outside pressure on Israel is completely unjustified and unwarranted, and we can't have it. Now, look, I'm not saying that I want a massive sanctions campaign on Israel or anything like that, but the U.S. needs to withdraw support for Israel, and then other countries should do what they want from there. As far as, if they don't want to trade, or individual people and companies as well. If you realize that this is an apartheid state, maybe you shouldn't buy or sell your goods from that particular country. All right, Speaker Johnson, supporting Israel is one of America's founding principles. So House Speaker Mike Johnson described support for Israel as one of America's founding principles during a speech at an event hosted by the Republican Jewish Committee on July 18th. He said, "It is an important principle that America and Israel stand together resolutely. That is part of who we are as a country, is one of our founding principles. I believe that we maintain peace through strength, and I think that the relationship with Israel is essential to who we are as Americans. Since the modern state of Israel was created in 1948, it is unclear what Johnson meant when he said the U.S. Israel relationship is a, quote, founding principle. The most well-known founding father would also disagree with Johnson's statement, as they strongly warned against permanent alliances and attachments to other nations. In his farewell address in 1796, George Washington said, "A passionate attachment of one nation for another produces a variety of evils. Sympathy for favorite nations, facilitating the illusion of an imaginary common interest in cases where no real common interest exists, and infusing into one of the enmities of the other, betrays the former into participation in the quarrels and wars of the latter without adequate justification." Johnson also threatened Democratic lawmakers with possible arrest if they protest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress, which is scheduled for this Thursday. He said there are some number of Democrats in the House who have said they are going to boycott the event, and others who are going to protest. We're going to have extra sergeants on arms on the floor, and if anybody gets out of hand, the Speaker of the House will bang the gavel. We're going to arrest people if we have to do it. We're going to get the message out. And so I also want to just say Glenn Greenwald's show, System Update, occasionally he will have a reporter do some just kind of original journalism and work. And so he's had Michael Tracy for, the 4 days of the Republican National Convention. They're on the floor doing some reporting for System Update. And the reporting was really interesting because, Tracy was just going up to the Republican saying, "Hey, how are you doing? Can I ask you some questions?" And it seemed for most people, his lineup of questions was something along the lines of this: how does an American first foreign policy factor into support for Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel? And, there are some, and he would tailor it to the Republican. So a Republican who would say maybe against giving support for Ukraine, he would ask, do they see it as a consistent American first policy to then also, support ending arms shipments to Israel as well, and things like this. And the answers he got in particular to Israel were extremely religious and all really centered around the idea of, America needs to protect Israel for religious reasons. Can't tell you how many of the congressmen said the Israelis are God's chosen people, and that's why, that the U.S. has to do this, has continued to arm Israel. And just, really concerning when the arguments are not only so thin, but also just based in this religious doctrine that doesn't necessarily hold up or exist. This is just their interpretation, or an interpretation of Christianity that has been applied to them, that basically says that, the Jews need to be in control of the Holy Land in order to bring about the second coming of Christ. And so there's this real religious devotion to Israel based on this whole idea that the Jews need to be in that land. And so, as Washington was talking about there, those kind of entangling alliances can be very dangerous for a nation. All right, next up here, this one from our friend Will Porter. Yemen's Houthis claim deadly Tel Aviv drone attack. So at least one person was killed and several others were injured in a drone strike on Tel Aviv Friday morning. Yemen's ruling Houthi government claimed responsibility for the blast, saying a new weapon was used in the operation. A spokesman for the Houthis announced the attack in a televised statement later on Friday. He said the drone mission utilized new unmanned weapon dubbing Yafa and successfully achieved its goals. The Houthis previously acknowledged a qualitative operation targeting Tel Aviv. So a Houthi-linked media report said a state of confusion prevailed among the enemy authorities following the attack. Israel's Iron Dome systems were unable to detect the drone until after reports from settlers about an explosion in the middle of the capital of the enemy entity. The exact type of drone used remains unclear, though Reuters cited an unnamed Israeli military official who described it as a large UAV that could fly large distances. The IDF later claimed it was an Iranian drone believed to have been launched from Yemen and had crossed into Israeli territory and hit a residential building downtown, per the IDF spokesperson, noting one fatality and at least 8 others being injured by the attack. The Times of Israel clarified that 4 of those hospitalized in treatment were for anxiety, while 4 others had sustained injuries. So the IDF said the strike was under deep investigation, and the IDF spokesperson added that the military was still checking the circumstances of the case and why the drone was not intercepted. He vowed the IDF would carry out regular situation assessments and take the necessary actions to protect our country, and said the strike landed not far from the American consulate. Reuters later reported that an apparent impact on the building located close to the U.S. Embassy premises in Tel Aviv. The office of the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said the Prime Minister was aware of the attack, with the Times of Israel stating he subsequently held a security briefing via phone with the heads of the security establishment. The drone strike came just days before the Prime Minister is set to travel to the United States, and some media reports suggested the trip could be at risk following Friday's attack. But I don't think any of that panned out. I think Netanyahu is still planning on attending. And also, you know, one thing to mention here is that Israel did bomb an Iranian consulate building, diplomatic facility in Tel Aviv, or in Damascus, excuse me. And so maybe this was seen by Iran, if they did give the Houthis this drone, as basically a way to counter and retaliate against the Americans and the Israelis for what the Israelis did in Syria. All right, so Houthi leader says Yemen pleased to be in direct confrontation with Israel. Last story today, this one from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. On Sunday, the Houthi leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, said Yemenis were pleased to be in direct confrontation with Israel and vowed to hit back hard after the Israeli bombing of Yemen's Red Sea port of Hodeidah. Al-Houthi said Yemeni people are pleased to be in direct confrontation with the Israeli enemy, and they are steadfast and brave people. Israel bombed fuel depots in Hodeidah on Saturday following the Houthi drone attack in Tel Aviv that killed 1 person. Yemeni health authorities said the Israeli attack killed at least 6 people and wounded 83. Many with severe burns, as the attack caused a massive fire. Al-Houthi said the Israeli attack was aimed at Yemen's economy, since the port of Hodeidah is a vital entry point for fuel and humanitarian aid. Since 2015, Yemen has been under a U.S.-Saudi blockade, which has been eased but not fully lifted. Al-Houthi noted that the U.S. and British bombing campaign in Yemen had done nothing to deter Houthi attacks on Israeli-linked shipping and other shipping in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and beyond. The Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, had made it clear they would only end their attacks on Israel if Israel ended the genocidal siege on Gaza. Also on Sunday, the Houthi military spokesperson said Yemen's response to the Israeli aggression against our country is inevitably coming and will be huge. Israeli officials said a missile fired from Yemen towards the Israeli port had been intercepted. Over the past 9 months, the Houthis have fired hundreds of drones and missiles towards Israel, but most were intercepted by U.S. warships in the Red Sea. The attack on Tel Aviv was notable since it was longer range than the other attacks. Israeli officials said that it traveled through Egypt and targeted Tel Aviv from the Mediterranean Sea. The Israeli airstrikes on Yemen were also first. Initial reports said the attack was supported by the U.S. and UK, but the Israeli military insisted it carried out the strike on its own. Israeli media has portrayed the attack as a major victory for Israel, since it struck targets that were further away than the Iranian capital of Tehran, but the Houthis are expected to be emboldened by the strikes, as they were by the U.S. and UK bombing campaigns, and will likely escalate attacks on Israel. The U.S. bet Saudi UAE war on the Houthis from 2015 to 2022 involved heavy airstrikes and a blockade, and the Houthis only became more capable fighting force during that time. That war killed at least 377,000 people, with more than half of them dying from starvation and disease caused by the siege. A conflict between the Houthis and Saudis has held relatively well since April of 2022, but new U.S. sanctions are blocking the implementation of a lasting peace deal. All right, everybody, that'll do it for the show today. We will have a full week of shows coming up here. Lots to talk about. I'm sure it's going to be a huge and heavy week for the news. So keep tuning in. And if you can, head on over to the Libertarian Institute and help us out with our summer fundraiser.